The first thing I noticed was the gate. The second thing I noticed was the survey stake sticking out of the dirt on my side of the property line. And the third thing I noticed was my wife standing beside it with a measuring tape in one hand and the biggest smile I'd seen on her face in months. Behind her, 3 construction trucks were parked along our gravel road. A crew of men was putting the final bolts into an 18-foot steel security gate. The HOA had spent $40,000 building it. They were celebrating. My wife wasn't. She looked at me and said 6 words I'll never forget. Did they check where they built it? I looked at the enormous gate, then at the survey stake, then back at my wife. No, I said slowly. I don't think they did. She smiled. Good. That was the moment I realized the HOA had just made the most expensive mistake in our neighborhood's history. My name is Daniel Carter. I'm 44 years old, and for most of my adult life, I'd learned one simple rule about property. You protect what you own. My wife Emily had a second rule. You document everything. We lived on 23 acres outside a growing Texas community called Red Creek, a place where old ranch roads were slowly being swallowed by new subdivisions. Our property had been in my family for almost 30 years. There was a weathered red barn behind the house, a wooden fence running along the western pasture, a gravel road leading to our driveway, and a small herd of cattle that seemed personally offended whenever strangers got too close to the fence. Our house wasn't fancy, it didn't need to be. It was home. And directly across from our western boundary was Red Creek Estates, a large HOA development that had been expanding toward our land for years. At first, we didn't have a problem with them. Then came the new board. The president was a man named Richard Holloway. Richard was 58, wealthy, polished, and the kind of man who believed confidence could replace permission. He drove a black Cadillac Escalade, wore expensive polo shirts, and rarely heard the word no. When the HOA announced plans for a new access gate, Richard personally came to my property. He stood beside my fence and pointed toward the county road. This entrance will improve security for everyone, he said. I leaned against the fence. Where exactly are you putting it? Near the western boundary. Near isn't a legal measurement. He smiled. I've already spoken with the HOA attorney. That answer should have bothered me more than it did. Instead, I told him the same thing I'd told the previous board. If the gate is on HOA property, build whatever you want. Or Richard nodded. That's exactly the plan. I didn't think much about it after that. Then 3 weeks later, Emily came into the kitchen carrying a letter. She dropped it on the table. What is this? I looked at the envelope.
Oh wait, well she nodded. I opened it.
The letter said the HOA would begin construction on a community security gate near our western boundary. It also said residents might experience temporary road closures. I read the location description twice. Emily watched me. What's wrong? The coordinates? What about them? They're wrong. She pulled out her phone. How wrong? I grabbed an old property survey from the drawer. About 20 feet. Emily's expression changed. 20 feet? Maybe more. She stared at the survey. Then she looked through the kitchen window toward the western pasture. Daniel, I know. If they build 20 feet onto our property, they won't. She raised an eyebrow. You sure? I'll stop them. I called the HOA office that afternoon. Richard answered. Daniel, good to hear from you. You've got the gate location wrong? Silence. What do you mean? The coordinates in your notice put the gate inside my property. Richard laughed. Not a nervous laugh. A confident one. We had the property reviewed by whom? Our engineer? Not a licensed surveyor? Another pause. Daniel, the location has been approved. By the county. By the HOA. I stared at the phone. Those aren't the same thing. His voice became colder. Don't make this more complicated than it needs to be. I hung up. Emily was waiting in the doorway. What did he say? I told her. She shook her head. Then get a survey. We hired a licensed land surveyor named Mark Bennett. Mark was 61, quiet, methodical, and had spent decades working on rural property boundaries. 2 days later, he arrived in a white Ford F-250 with a surveying trailer. I walked the western boundary with him. He didn't talk much. He placed markers, checked measurements, compared them with the county records. Then he stopped. He looked at me. Mr. Carter, you're going to want to see this. He pointed toward the ground. A small orange survey flag stood almost 21 feet away from the location where the HOA had marked the gate. Your boundary is here. I stared at the flag. And their gate. A mark looked toward the construction markings, about 20 feet inside your property. My stomach tightened. Can they do that? No. Even if they already started, no. Mark pulled out his phone. I'd document everything. Emily arrived 5 minutes later. She listened silently as Mark explained the measurements. Then she did something I didn't expect. She took photographs. Lots of them. The stakes, the construction markings, the trucks, the workers, the gate plans, the road, the existing fence, everything. I asked her why she was taking so many pictures. She looked at me. Because if they know they're wrong, they'll deny it. That sentence stayed with me. The next morning I went back to the construction site. The gate was already taking shape. It was enormous. 18 feet tall, heavy steel, 2 sliding sections, concrete foundations, security cameras mounted on top. The HOA had turned what was supposed to be a simple entrance into something that looked like the front gate of a military facility. Richard was there. So was the HOA attorney, Susan Miller. She was standing beside a black SUV holding a folder. Richard. He turned. Daniel. I pointed at the foundation. Stop construction. Susan stepped forward. On what grounds? That foundation is on my property. She smiled. We have documentation showing otherwise. I handed her a copy of Mark's survey. She glanced at it, then handed it back. Our engineer disagrees. Your engineer isn't a licensed surveyor. That's your opinion. No, that's a fact. Richard stepped between us. Daniel, the HOA has already spent more than $30,000 on this project. That's not my problem. We're protecting property values, but building on mine. His jaw tightened. Susan closed the folder. We're not discussing this on the road, bud. Then where? Through attorneys. I looked at the gate. Fine. Richard smiled. Good, I walked away. I thought that was the end of the conversation. It wasn't that night. I found a letter taped to my front door. It was from the HOA. It accused me of interfering with an authorized construction project. It warned me that any attempt to obstruct access could result in fines. Emily read it twice, then she looked at me. They're trying to scare you. I know. No. There, she put the letter on the table. They're trying to make you react. I sat down. What do you want me to do? Nothing. I stared at her. She smiled. Let them finish? I thought she'd lost her mind. Emily, they're building an 18-foot gate on our property. I know. One need to stop them. Not yet. Why? She opened her laptop. I've been looking through the county records. She turned the screen toward me. There was an old plat map. This isn't just about the boundary. I leaned closer. What am I looking at? The original easement. I frowned. What easement? She pointed at a narrow strip of land running along the western edge of our property. The HOA's entire entrance depends on this. I looked at her. Emily, what are you saying? She took a breath. I'm saying the HOA may not own the road they're building this gate to control. For the first time, I understood why she was smiling. The gate wasn't just on our property. The road leading to it might not belong to the HOA either. And Richard Holloway had no idea, at least not yet. The next morning, construction continued. Concrete trucks arrived at 7. Steel workers arrived at 8. By noon, the gate was nearly complete. Emily and I stood on our porch watching from a distance. Why aren't we stopping them? I asked. She didn't look away. Because they're doing our work for us. What work? As she finally turned, building evidence. At 4:17 that afternoon, the final steel beam was bolted into place. The gate stood 18 feet above the ground. Richard arrived in his black Cadillac Escalade. He stepped out and smiled proudly. He shook hands with the contractor. Then he looked directly at our house. He raised one hand and waved. I didn't wave back. Emily did. Richard seemed confused. Then my wife walked down the driveway carrying a folder. She stopped at the edge of our property. Richard walked toward her. What can I do for you, Emily? She smiled politely. Nothing. He frowned. Then why are you here? She looked up at the enormous gate. Just wanted to see the finished product. Richard smiled. It's going to make this neighborhood much safer. Emily nodded. I'm sure it will. Then she opened her folder. Richard's smile disappeared. She held out a document. Now I have one question. He didn't take it. What question? Emily pointed toward the ground. Which side of the property line did you build your $40,000 gate on? Richard stared at her. For the first time since we'd met him, he had nothing to say. And behind him, the enormous gate slowly began to slide shut. Richard stared at the document in Emily's hand. For several seconds, nobody moved. The construction workers had gone quiet. Even the machinery seemed to disappear into the background. Finally, Richard reached for the paper. Emily didn't let go. You should probably read it before you touch anything else, she said. Richard pulled it from her fingers. His eyes moved across the page. His face changed. Not dramatically. Just enough for me to notice. What is this? Our certified survey, Emily said. I've seen this. No, she replied. You've seen a copy of our old survey. She pulled another document from the folder. This is the new boundary survey completed by Mark Bennett 2 days ago. Richard looked at the second page. Then at Susan Miller, the AOA attorney. Susan stepped closer. Let me see that. Emily handed it to her. Susan studied the document. I watched her eyes move from the survey line to the legal description. Then she looked toward the gate. Richard. He turned. What? She lowered her voice. We need to talk. Richard's expression hardened. About what? Susan pointed toward the foundation. If this survey is accurate, the gate is on Carter property. Richard laughed. That's one survey. It's a licensed survey. Our engineer disagreed. Susan looked at him. An engineer doesn't establish property boundaries. The contractor standing nearby suddenly became very interested in his boots. Richard noticed. Everyone back to work. Nobody moved. He shouted again. Back to work. The workers slowly returned to their equipment. I stepped forward. Richard, construction stops now. He looked at me. You don't get to order my contractors around. No. I pointed at the concrete foundation. But I can tell you that nobody has permission to continue construction on my land. Susan looked at Richard. Is right about that. Richard's face reddened. You expect me to tear down a $40,000 gate? No, I said. I expect you to move it. He laughed again. But this time there was no confidence behind it. You have no idea what you're talking about. I looked at Emily. She quietly handed me another document. I glanced at it. Then my stomach dropped. It wasn't the survey. It was an old county plat. The same one she'd shown me the night before. This is the original easement? I said. Susan's eyes narrowed. Where did you get that? County records. Richard looked at her. What does it mean? Susan didn't answer immediately. I did. It means the road you're trying to control doesn't belong to your HOA. Richard stared at me. That's impossible. Emily smiled. It's not. She pointed toward the gravel road beyond the gate. That road was originally established as a shared agricultural access easement. Richard looked at the road. Then back at Susan. The HOA owns that road. Susan shook her head. Not according to this. His voice rose. Then why have we been maintaining it for 12 years? Maintenance doesn't equal ownership. Richard turned toward the gate. I could almost see the calculation happening in his head. The HOA had spent weeks planning the project. They'd hired contractors. They'd poured concrete. They'd installed cameras. They'd paid for steel. They'd told homeowners the new gate would secure the community. And now they were learning that the gate wasn't even where it legally belonged. Richard took a step toward me. This is a misunderstanding. No, I said. It's a survey dispute. Still no. I pointed toward the ground. The boundary was recorded long before your HOA existed. Susan stepped between us. Everyone needs to calm down. Richard looked at her. Can you fix this? She hesitated. That hesitation said more than words could. Richard's voice became quiet. Can you? We need to review the title documents. How long? I can't give you an answer tonight. He looked at me. You planned this? I almost laughed. You spent $40,000 building a gate on someone else's property, and somehow I'm the one who planned it. He said nothing. Emily closed her folder. We're done here. We walked home. I expected to feel victorious. Instead, I felt uneasy. Something about Richard's reaction bothered me. He wasn't acting like a man who had made an innocent mistake. He was acting like someone who had just discovered a secret. That night, Emily spread every document across the dining room table. There were surveys, tax maps, old plats, deeds, easement agreements, county records, OA bylaws. I stared at the pile. Where did you get all this? 3 hours at the county records office. You did all this today. She nodded. What else did you find? She pulled out one more document. It was an HOA meeting record from 7 years earlier. I read the first page, then the second. Then I stopped. What am I looking at? Look at the highlighted section. I read it again. The board had discussed the western entrance. One sentence was highlighted. The association shall not encroach upon adjoining agricultural property without written consent. I looked at Emily.
Written consent? Exactly.
Did they ever get mine? She shook her head. Did they get yours? No. Then the question isn't whether they knew where the property line was. She leaned back. The question is why they built there anyway. The next morning, my phone rang at 6020. It was Mark Bennett, the surveyor. Daniel, we need to talk. His voice sounded different. What happened? I received a call from the HOA attorney. What did she want? She questioned my survey. That's normal. Not like this. I sat up. What do you mean? She asked whether I'd be willing to change the boundary line. I stared at the wall. She asked you to falsify a survey. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. Mark sighed. I told her the survey stands.
Good. Daniel, there's something else.
What? I found an older monument on the property. What kind? An iron marker? Where? Near the southwest corner? Is it important? Very. He paused. That marker predates the current subdivision. My stomach tightened. How old? Possibly 30 years. Then it confirms the boundary. I leaned back. Can you document it? I already did. There was another pause. And Daniel? Yeah. You might want to hire a lawyer. That afternoon, we met attorney Michael Reynolds. He was 52 tall, calm, and spoke so quietly that people naturally stopped talking to hear him. His office overlooked the county courthouse. He studied the documents for nearly an hour. Finally, he looked up. The OA has a problem. I smiled. How big? Potentially very big. Emily leaned forward. Explain. Michael tapped the survey. Your property boundary is cleared. He tapped the easement. The access issue is also clear. Then he tapped the OA minutes. And this is the most interesting part. What? They knew they needed your written permission. I stared at the page. Then why did they build? Michael looked at me. That's what we need to find out. 3 days later, the HOA called an emergency meeting. They held it inside the clubhouse. I expected 20 people. More than 70 homeowners showed up. Some were angry. Some were confused. Some were filming on their phones. Richard stood at the front of the room. The enormous gate was visible through the clubhouse windows. He looked exhausted. This situation has been misrepresented, he began. Someone shouted. How? Another person yelled, you spent $40,000. Richard raised his hand. We acted based on professional advice. A homeowner stood. Did the OA own the land? Richard didn't answer. The room erupted. Susan Miller stepped forward. Everyone needs to remain respectful. A man in the second row shouted, did you build the gate on Carter's property? Susan looked at Richard. Richard looked at her. Finally, she answered. That answer made everything worse. People started talking at once. I sat quietly beside Emily. Then someone walked toward us. It was a woman named Karen Wells, one of the HOA board members. She leaned down. Daniel, can we talk privately? I followed her outside. She looked terrified. What is it? She glanced toward the clubhouse. Richard didn't tell us. Tell you what? About the boundary. I said nothing. She continued. He told the board the land had already been cleared. Cleared by whom? He said the county. I stared at her. The county doesn't clear private property boundaries. I know that now. Why are you telling me? She reached into her purse. I kept copies of the board emails. She handed me a small flash drive. Why? Because I don't want to be blamed for something I didn't approve. I looked at the drive. What's on it? Everything. Before I could ask another question, she walked away. I returned to the clubhouse. Emily saw the drive in my hand. What is that, Karen? She immediately understood. That night, Michael opened the files. There were emails, dozens of them, then hundreds. Most were ordinary HA business, landscaping, security, parking, maintenance. Then we found the gate discussions. One email caught my attention. It was from Richard, sent 6 months earlier. We need to secure the western access point before Carter realizes the boundary issue. I read it twice. Then a third time, Emily leaned over my shoulder. What did he say? I turned the screen toward her. She went completely still. Michael read it. His expression hardened. That's not good for them. I scrolled. Another email. Once the foundation is poured, the cost of reversal will make litigation impractical. I felt a chill. They knew? Michael nodded. They knew exactly what they were doing. But there was more. A final email had been sent to the HOA board. It came from Richard's private account. Do not discuss the property, line concern in official meetings. Keep communications verbal. I looked at Michael. That's why the minutes don't mention it. Exactly. Emily whispered. They thought nobody would find the emails. Michael closed the laptop. Now we know why they were so confident. The next morning I drove to the county courthouse with Michael. We met county surveyor James Porter. He was a gray-haired man in his 60s who had spent most of his career handling land disputes. He looked at Mark's survey, then at the county plat, then at the original easement. He sighed. There's no ambiguity here. Meaning, the gate is on your property. Michael nodded. And the road. James pointed to the map. The HOA has a right of access, I frowned. So they can use it. Less! But they don't own it, no. So can they put a gate here? James looked at the documents. Not without addressing the property rights of everyone affected. Michael leaned forward. What about the HOA's security claim? James smiled faintly. Security doesn't erase property law. Those words felt like the first good news I'd heard in weeks. Then James turned the map around. There is another issue. What? He pointed to the gate location. That gate may also interfere with emergency access. I looked at him. How? If the gate is placed here, the emergency turnaround area is too narrow. Michael's expression changed. That could involve the fire marshal. James nodded. And potentially the sheriff's office. I suddenly realized this wasn't just about a fence anymore. It was becoming a county-level problem. And Richard Holloway had built the entire thing himself. That evening, I drove home as the sun dropped behind the pasture. The gate stood in the distance. 18 feet of steel. $40,000 of HOA money. Concrete sunk into my land. Security cameras pointed toward our property. I thought the worst was over. I was wrong. At 10:43 that night, someone knocked on our door. I opened it. 2 sheriff's deputies stood outside. One of them held a folder. Mr. Carter.
Yes.
And I'm Deputy Harris. He looked at the gate behind me. There's been a complaint?
About me? No.
He looked at the property. About the HOA. I stepped aside. Come in. Deputy Harris opened the folder. We received a report that you were threatening to remove the gate. I never threatened anyone. I know. He showed me a photograph. It was taken from the HOA security camera. It showed me standing near the gate 3 days earlier. But that wasn't what concerned me. The timestamp said 2:13 a.m. I had been asleep. I looked at the deputy.
Wasn't there.
I believe you. Then why are you showing me this? He pointed at the photograph. Because somebody was. I stared at the image. The figure standing beside the gate had my jacket, my hat, my boots, but it wasn't me. Emily came into the room. She looked at the photograph. Her face went pale. Daniel. I looked at her. What? She pointed at the figure. That's not you, I know. Deputy Harris closed the folder. We think someone may have entered your property wearing clothing similar to yours. Why? He looked toward the dark window. That's what we're trying to find out. Then he said something that changed the entire case. The camera footage from that night is missing. The missing footage changed everything. Until that moment, I had believed the HOA's biggest problem was a bad property decision. Now I wasn't so sure. Someone had entered our property in the middle of the night wearing clothes similar to mine. Someone had been standing beside the gate. And somehow, the camera footage showing exactly what that person did had disappeared. Deputy Harris told us the sheriff's office would investigate. I asked him whether he thought the HOA was responsible. He shook his head. We don't know yet. His partner looked toward the western pasture. But somebody wanted that camera footage gone after they left. Emily locked the front door, then the back door. Then she checked every window. I had never seen her that nervous. What are you thinking? I asked. She looked at me. I'm thinking this stopped being a property dispute. The next morning, Michael Reynolds called. You need to come to my office. I drove there with Emily. When we arrived, Michael had Mark Bennett and county surveyor James Porter already waiting. Michael put a folder on the table. The sheriff found something. What? The missing camera footage wasn't deleted. I stared at him. Then where is it? Someone's accessed the HOA security system remotely. Emily leaned forward. From where? Michael slid a printed report across the table. The HOA office. I looked at the time. Who had access? Richard Holloway. Silence filled the room. Michael continued. There's another problem. He opened a second folder. The contractor who installed the gate says Richard personally instructed him to move the foundation 21 feet west from the original plan. My jaw tightened. Why? Michael looked at me. To place it inside your property. Emily whispered. He did it intentionally. Michael nodded. That's what the evidence suggests. I asked the question that had been bothering me. Why would he knowingly build on our land? James Porter answered. Because the original HOA entrance may not have been legally accessible from the county road. I frowned. What does that mean? James pointed to the map. The HOA needed access through the easement, which they had. Yes, but the easement has restrictions. What kind? It cannot be used for a permanent security obstruction without consent from the affected landowners. Emily looked at me. So the gate wasn't just on our land. It was also potentially blocking an easement they had no authority to close. Michael nodded. Exactly. Suddenly, the entire project made sense. Richard didn't build the gate because it was the best location. He built it because it was the only location that allowed him to control the entrance the way he wanted. And he believed that once the gate was finished, the HOA would have enough money invested in it that nobody would force him to move it. He had calculated that fighting him would cost us more than tolerating him. He had simply calculated wrong. 2 days later, Michael filed for an emergency injunction. The county scheduled a hearing. The HOA responded immediately. Their attorney claimed the gate was part of a community safety improvement. They claimed my survey was disputed. They claimed the HOA had relied on professional advice. They claimed removing the gate would create a security risk for hundreds of residents. But they had one problem: their own emails. The court ordered both sides to produce documents. That's when the truth started falling apart. The contractor submitted a sworn statement. He said Richard had told him, "Put the foundation exactly where the stakes are. Don't worry about the Carter property." The surveyor submitted his field notes. The county submitted the original plat. Karen Wells submitted the board emails, and the sheriff's office confirmed that someone had accessed the security system the night the suspicious figure appeared. Then Michael found something nobody expected: a payment. Not from the HOA. From Richard's private company. It was a $7,800 payment to the engineer who had approved the original gate location. I stared at the document. Why would Richard personally pay him? Michael shook his head. We don't know yet. The hearing was scheduled for Friday morning. I barely slept Thursday night. Emily sat beside me on the porch. The gate was visible in the distance. Moonlight reflected off the steel. You okay? She asked. I don't know. She took my hand. We already know the truth. Knowing the truth and proving it are two different things. She smiled. That's why I kept the paperwork. I laughed quietly. You were right. I usually am. I looked at her. Usually. She smiled. Don't ruin the moment. Friday morning, the courthouse was packed. Homeowners filled the benches. Some supported Richard. Others were furious. The board sat behind their attorney. Richard sat in the front row. He looked completely different from the man I'd met months earlier. No confident smile. No expensive sunglasses. No casual jokes. Just a tight jaw and folded hands. Judge Eleanor Brooks entered. Everyone stood. The hearing began. The HOA attorney argued first. She said the gate was essential to neighborhood security. She said moving it would cost another $40,000. She said the HOA had acted in good faith. Then Michael stood. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He began with the survey, then the original plat, then the easement, then the HOA minutes, then the emails. Finally, he introduced the contractor's statement. The courtroom became silent. Michael handed the judge one page. Your Honor, this is an email from Mr. Holloway stating that the association should not discuss the boundary concern in official meetings. The judge read it. Richard shifted in his seat. Michael continued. Then, after being informed that the property line was disputed, Mr. Holloway instructed the contractor to continue construction. The HOA attorney objected. The judge overruled her. Michael then presented the payment to the engineer. Your Honor, the engineer who approved the gate location received a private payment of $7,800 from Mr. Holloway's company. The room erupted in whispers. Richard finally stood. That's not what it looks like. Judge Brooks looked at him. Mr. Holloway, you will remain seated unless addressed. Richard sat down. Michael turned toward the judge. There's one final issue. He presented the sheriff's report. The HOA's security system was remotely accessed on the night an unidentified person entered the Carter property. The HOA attorney objected. That is irrelevant. Michael shook his head. It becomes relevant when the footage disappeared immediately afterward. The judge studied the report. Then she looked toward Richard. Mr. Holloway, do you have anything to say? Richard stood slowly. He looked at the judge. Then at me. Then at Emily. I was trying to protect the neighborhood. The judge said nothing. Richard continued. Crime has been increasing. The judge interrupted. That does not answer the question. He swallowed. I believe the gate was necessary. Did you know the gate was being constructed on Mr. Carter's property? Richard hesitated. That hesitation was devastating. Finally, he said, I wasn't certain. Michael immediately stood. Your Honor, may I? The judge nodded. Michael held up the original survey. Mr. Holloway was notified of the boundary discrepancy 6 weeks before construction began. Richard said nothing. Michael continued. And the board email demonstrates that he knew the property issue existed. Richard's shoulders dropped. The judge issued the injunction. The HOA was prohibited from operating the gate. The gate could not remain on my property. The HOA was ordered to remove the structure and restore the land. But there was more. The court referred the disputed financial records and possible false statements to the appropriate county authorities for further review. As we walked out of the courtroom, Karen Wells approached us. I resigned from the board. I nodded. Good. She looked embarrassed. I should have spoken sooner.
Wes!
She lowered her eyes. Who was afraid? Emily touched her arm. Fear makes people quiet. Karen looked at her. What made you speak? And Emily smiled. I got tired of watching people confuse silence with permission. That sentence stayed with me. The OA appealed. Then they requested mediation. Michael told us we had no reason to rush, so we waited. The mediation lasted 6 hours. By the end of it, the OA agreed to remove the gate. They also agreed to pay the costs of restoring the property. But the biggest surprise came when their own homeowners demanded an independent audit of the board's spending. Richard resigned 2 weeks later. The HOA hired a new president. They hired an independent surveyor. They rewrote their construction approval procedures, and they adopted a rule requiring written property owner consent before any project could touch a boundary or easement. But the gate still had to come down. The day the demolition crew arrived, Dozens of homeowners watched. The same men who had built the 18-foot structure now stood beneath it with cutting equipment. The first steel panel came loose. It crashed onto the gravel. The sound echoed across the pasture. Emily stood beside me. "You know," she said, "they spent $40,000 building that thing, and how much will they spend removing it?" She smiled. "That's not our problem." The crew worked all afternoon. By sunset, the gate was gone. The concrete foundations were broken apart. The ground was repaired. The survey markers were still there, exactly where they'd always been. A week later, I stood beside the old boundary marker with Mark Bennett. He checked the measurements one final time. "Everything's restored." I nodded. "Thanks, Mark." He smiled. "You know what the funny part is?" "What?" "If they'd called me before construction, I could have solved this for a few $100s. I laughed. "They spent $40,000 instead. Some lessons are expensive." I looked toward the road. The gate was gone. The view was open again. Cattle grazed beyond the fence. The red barn stood exactly where it had stood for decades. For the first time in months, our property felt like ours again. But there was one final thing. About a month later, Emily received an envelope from the county. Inside was a copy of a settlement record. Attached was a note from the county surveyor. He had written, "Your wife was right to ask the question." Emily showed it to me. I laughed. "She's gonna frame that." "Already did." She hung it above her desk. The question was simple. Which side of the property line did they build their $40,000 gate on? The answer had cost the HOA money, reputation, leadership, and months of legal trouble. But it gave me something much more valuable. It reminded me that owning land isn't just about the fence around it. It's about knowing exactly where your rights begin and where someone else's end. Years later, whenever I drive past that entrance, I still remember the 18-foot gate. Not because it was impressive. Not because it cost $40,000. But because it taught an entire neighborhood a lesson nobody wanted to learn. A property line may look like nothing more than a mark in the dirt, until somebody crosses it. Then that little line becomes the most important line in the world. And as Emily always says, never argue with someone who brought the paperwork. Because the HOA built an 18-foot gate to control our property. My wife let them finish it. Then she simply asked one question. And that question brought the whole thing crashing down.